This video is a continuation of the last video. In the last video, I think I covered question 1. In this video, we'll cover question 4. Let's get to it. Question 4. In order to be able to describe where we found something in the ITA, we need to become familiar with how to correctly cite provisions. So this question is another question about citations. Question 4, part 1. Some subsections have more than 26 paragraphs. How does the ITA deal with this? For example, what paragraph follows paragraph 21Z? Notice the terminology there. Because we were going to a paragraph, because that was the final destination, the wording was paragraph 21Z. If we did not say the word paragraph, if that wasn't there, we would have said section 20, subsection 1, paragraph Z. This one here is actually a bit of a tricky example. There's 26 letters in the alphabet, right? A to Z. After Z, typically what would happen in the ITA is they would go to paragraph AA. But that's not exactly what happens in this instance. Let's take a look. Take a moment, please, to turn to the detailed table of sections. You know how to get here now, right? In case you're still practicing, no problem. Take the TaxAct, turn it sideways, and go to the first page of that first visual marker. Flip the page until you arrive at section 20. Section 20, subsection 1, begins with paragraph A, then B, C, D, E, and we'll just keep going to the end. At the bottom of my screen, you can probably see 20 subsection 1 paragraph Z. What we would expect to come after this is paragraph AA, but that's not quite what happens here. You can see that there is a paragraph AA which involves the landscaping of grounds. We can also see that 20 subsection 1 paragraph Z is a cancellation of lease. And it looks like at some point in time, the legislators felt the need, so something else related to paragraph Z, and they put it in between by indicating Z.1. Let's go back to the question. The question has two parts. How does the ITA deal with this when we have more than 26 paragraphs? Typically, the ITA would go from paragraph Z to paragraph AA. Now to answer the next part of the question, what paragraph follows paragraph 20, subsection 1, paragraph Z? The answer to that, we just saw 20, subsection 1, paragraph Z.1. Question 4, part 2. Most sections have a subsection, but not all do. From division B, subdivision C, provide an example of a section that does not have a subsection. I hope at this point you're starting to get a feel for the fact that we are always asking you to go to subdivision A, B, C, D, and eventually E inside of division B. Subdivision C, we've already gone to a couple of times. Subdivision C, you can recall, stands for capital gains and capital losses. Or to be technically correct, it's taxable capital gains and allowable capital losses. But I always remembered it by saying C stands for capital. Do you remember where it begins? If not, that's okay. Go back to the detailed table of sections and flip the pages until you get to subdivision C. Eventually you'll arrive at subdivision C, taxable capital gains and allowable capital loss. And you will see that it begins at section 38. Let's go back to the question. We are asked to provide an example of a section that does not have a subsection. Going back to the detailed table of sections, we can see that section 38 right at the beginning does not have a subsection 1. It goes straight to paragraph A, and then A.1 and B and paragraph C. So there is no subsection for section 38. We can see that section 38.1 is the same thing, and 38.2. No subsection for either of those sections. Can you find another? Keep looking. Here's one that Hala found. Section 51.1 does not have a subsection. I think we have enough here so we can answer the question. Answers would include Section 38, Section 38.1, 38.2, and 51.1. Question 4, Part 3. When a definition appears in a citation, the word being defined must form part of the citation. Let's pause for a second and try to remember what that means. If you recall from question 1, we did cite a provision that had a definition in it. Let's take a look at that. When we were looking at the definition of principal residence, the citation, section 54, had to include the defined term, principal residence, in quotations. That's what question 4, part 3 is referring to when it says, when a definition appears in a citation, the word being defined must form part of the citation. Let's keep going. For example, the balance due day, the question implies balance due day is its own defined term, i.e., the day that the payment of any balance of taxes owing is due for a trust is 90 days after the end of the year. Let's pause there. We were just told that there's a defined term called balance due day, and we were told what the rule is. We were told that the rule is that the day taxes are due for a trust is 90 days after the end of the year. In tax, it's not always good enough just to state the rule. Sometimes you have to state your authority or cite your authority. In other words, sometimes you've got to be able to say, well, this is the rule, and here's the legislation that proves it. You've got to back up your work. So how would we cite this rule? Well, let's go back to the question. We are told that this rule is set out in the definition of balance due day. That means we are being told that the rule will be found in the definition of the term. So can you find and state the citation that gives authority for this rule? In other words, we were told what a rule was, and now we are being asked to go and find the rule and then cite it so someone else could go and find it. Think of it as an audit trail if you want. A great way to deal with questions like this is to look at the index. So take the Tax Act, turn it sideways, look at the last visual indicator. Go to the first page of the last indicator to find the index. The index. When you get to the index, it'll look something like this, and it will start with the A's. In my version of the Income Tax Act, the balance due day appears on page 2355 in the index. You will see that the term balance due day, it appears in the Income Tax Act multiple times. Recall that we are looking for the definition of balance due day. So let's go to section 248, subsection 1. In my Income Tax Act, section 248, subsection 1 begins on page 1537, and these definitions are for the entire Income Tax Act. Find the term balance due day in section 248, subsection 1. In my Income Tax Act, the term balance due day is on page 1540. And the balance due day of a taxpayer means, then we have paragraph A, and you could read subparagraph 1 and clause A, B, and C. I'll spare you the pain today, and I'll let you know that the answer resides in paragraph A, subparagraph 2, where it says in any other case, the day that is 90 days after the end of the year. So take a look at how this citation is going to look. We know that we are in section 248, subsection 1. Then we must write out the term, balance due day. After that, we will write out the rest. Paragraph A, subparagraph 2 is where the rule that we are looking for resides. This means we can go back to the question and we can answer it as follows. Section 248, subsection 1, balance due day, paragraph A, subparagraph 2. Question 4, part 4. Reading references within the Act can sometimes be confusing. For example, in subsection 13.7.3, it states, for the purposes of paragraph 7e. On what page in the ITA would we find this paragraph 7e that is referred to? Let's look at it one more time, just to make sure we understand what it says. It says reading references within the Act can sometimes be confusing. Thank you, Captain Obvious. For example, in subsection 13.7.3, it states, for the purposes of paragraph 7e. So let's start this way. Can we find in the ITA where subsection 13.7.3 is? Let's start off by just finding that. So go ahead, grab your Income Tax Act and start looking for it. In My Tax Act, 13 subsection 7.3 is found on page 76. And we can see right at the beginning of section 13, subsection 7.3, it begins by saying, for the purposes of paragraph 7e. That's what the question was saying. The question said, in section 13, subsection 7.3, it makes reference to paragraph 7e, or you could say subsection 7, paragraph E. It wants to know which 7e is it talking about. Whenever you see something like that, a reference to a subsection and paragraph within a section, it's referring to the subsection and paragraph within that section. Let me show you what I mean. We're in section 13. And that means that this reference inside of section 13, subsection 7.3, when it says this, it's referring to section 13. It's referring to section 13, subsection 7, paragraph E. But we're not done. It specifically asks us on what page in the ITA would we find this paragraph 7e that is referred to. Well, now that we know it's not some random 7e, it's section 13, subsection 7, paragraph E, we can go find the page. The answer will be different depending on what version of the Income Tax Act you're looking at, but that's the way to go and find it. So let's take a look. Section 13, subsection 7, paragraph E refers to the non-arm's length acquisition of something. We haven't gone that far in the course yet. But in my version of the ITA, this is on page 73. So I'll answer on page 73. Now, typically, we never cite anything with the page number in tax. It's somewhat irrelevant. Someone else might be using an electronic version of the Income Tax Act. Someone else might be using a version by a different publisher or a different company altogether. We only use citations for the provision. We don't use page numbers. When we teach it, and I know that everyone is using the same version of the Income Tax Act, we refer to page numbers sometimes. Or for a question like this, where we're trying to explain how the Tax Act might reference a provision within a provision. That's all. Question 4, part 5. What section number is the section between section 39 and section 40? Hey, that should be an easy one for us by now, right? You've got this. Give it a try. Go back to the detailed table of sections and find section 39. We were asked what section is between section 39 and section 40. Section 40 is down here on my screen. Well, we can see, if we begin at section 39, that we're in section 39 all the way until here. The next section is 39.1. And that is the only section, 39.1, between sections 39 and 40. there are several subsections, but the question was asking for sections. So the answer is 39.1. Question 4, Part 6. What subsection numbers is or are the subsection between subsections 6.1 and 6.2? Whereas the previous question asked us just for the section, this question is asking us for the subsection. Let's take a look. Go back to the detailed table of sections and flip to the beginning. Here's 6 subsection 1. And that continues for a while, and then we see subsection 1.1 and 1.2, and then subsection 2. So note once again what's happening here. We have section 6, subsection 1, and then we have paragraph A, B, C, D. It goes on and on all the way to paragraph K and L. Then we move to a new subsection, which is 1.1, and then another new subsection, which is 1.2, until we get to section 6, subsection 2. Therefore, the answer to question 4, part 6, is 6 subsection 1.1 and 6 subsection 1.2. Question 4, part 7. What is the section number between sections 118.8 and 118.9? Well, turn to the detailed table of sections and start flipping. Here I am in section 118 in the detailed table of sections. This is probably a good time to mention that section 118 deals with tax credits, and tax credits are an area in tax that changes a lot. And so there are a lot of sections and subsections and paragraphs in section 118. And when it says 118.8, you want to be really careful that you don't mistake it for 118.08. Let's take a look. Notice section 118. 118 has subsection 1 in it and, well, a lot of subsections in it. And if we scroll down, we eventually get to 118.01, 0.02, 0.03, 04, and that'll continue for a while. Try to find 118.8. Eventually, you will get there. Here's 118.8, not 0.08, but 0.8. which relates to the transfer of unused credits to a spouse. Then it looks like at some point they added another one, tuition tax credit transferred, and then we have 118.9, transfer to parent or grandparent. So I haven't gone to these sections, I haven't read them, but I would think that 118.8 existed, then 118.9, and then 118.81 probably came along later. But this would be the answer to the question. What is the section number between sections 118.8 and 118.9? We just looked at the answer. It's 118.81. Hopefully, after going through that on your own and then watching this debrief, you have a better idea of what a section is, what a subsection is, and what a paragraph is. Section is the number without brackets. Subsection is the number with brackets. Paragraph is the lowercase letter in brackets. Believe it or not, back when I was a BCIT student, when I had to do my first lab, it was more or less just like this one. It's really good to practice and perhaps practice more than once. It does a good job of getting you oriented and used to the different terminology of the Income Tax Act. It gets you in there, it gets you flipping the pages, and hopefully by the time you've done it, you're a little less intimidated by the whole thing. Anyhow, that's it for this one. Until next time, thanks for watching.